Hi, everybody. Melissa here. And today's practice is called the bad place and the good place. And this is a visualization and journaling practice for helping us to name our feelings. And so this will be a brief lesson, but one that I hope will stay in your mind that you can carry through your cycle and can serve you when it comes to naming and describing how we're feeling to help us process those big luteal emotions. And so this lesson, as I mentioned, is brief, and so it will consist of a discussion of the power of visualization. We're going to talk about the bad, and we'll talk about the good, and then we'll also talk about where we are now and how to use this information to influence how we feel going forward. So the power of visualization. And so I am a firm believer in visualization. One of the things that I like to remind people of that we would not have had a chair if someone had not first thought of a chair in their mind. And so our mind is very, very powerful, and its job is to think. It is meant to take in the stimulation around us. It is meant to take in how we're feeling, and it organizes that information. And sometimes it can feel like it's doing that all on its own. So it's important that we try to direct the habits of the mind. And much of the yoga practice is about this direction. Most of the Yoga Sutras are talking about how to harness the power of the mind. And so when we think about how our mind behaves, especially during luteal, we know that it can absolutely wreak havoc on us. It can bring up the worst stuff we've ever thought, the worst things we've ever felt and experienced. It can be very, very cruel. And so we want to try to redirect that. That can be a huge difference between how we experience luteal and how we may experience the rest of our cycle. And so it's important to remember that the mind is going to think. It's meant to do that. That is its design and its nature. And so we want to try to use the energy that is already happening in our favor. And so, of course, that sounds way easier to do than it is actually to do. But if we can do that, or at least start to get a little bit better at that, that tool can be invaluable to us as practitioners of yoga and people with PMDD. And so when it comes to our feelings, sometimes our feelings aren't necessarily in our mind. Sometimes our feelings are in places in our bodies. Sometimes it's just a response. Sometimes our feelings are just almost abstract. We don't really know where they are. And so we want to try to name them, sense into them physically, and work in a way that honors them rather than avoids, ignores, neglects them. Because we know if we do just push them aside, they're going to bubble back up. And so we want to make sure that we're trying to process feelings so that we can move through them, have a better relationship to them, and they don't own us during Hell Week. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit now about the bad place. And so, unfortunately, this is a place a lot of us are familiar with. So you may find that it's a little bit easier to have discussions about what feels bad instead of what feels good. But we're going to do both in this lesson. And so for our journaling exercise, I want you to use words to describe how you are feeling. And so these can be texture words, they can be sensation words, they can be feeling words, any word that kind of comes to mind, any images that may help to describe this feeling is what we're really going to focus on as we work on this visualization of what we're experiencing. And so you can think of all sorts of words that may describe what you're feeling. If, for example, you are feeling overwhelmed, you may feel stuck, you may feel cold, you may feel paralyzed, you may feel bound up or tied up. And so we want to try to develop a really great vocabulary list, a great kind of word bank we can pull from to help us describe those feelings. And so this presentation will be available in PDF. So make sure that you save this portion because we're going to come back to this exercise of describing. So using describing words for what we're feeling, using describing images for what we're feeling, and then also thinking about how we would explain this to someone else, because it's helpful if we almost act as though there's a third party who needs help understanding. If we kind of move it away from our personal experience directly and have some insight as though if we were trying to explain it to a therapist, for example, or our best friend, or if you have a close relationship with a family member, if you're trying to explain it to them what you were experiencing. And so we want to do this across different levels. We want to do it on the emotional level. We want to do it on the physical level. We want to try to be as descriptive as possible. And so luckily, my teacher created some amazing charts that we can use to help us assess our feelings and really get them elucidated in terms of the description. So let's go ahead and look at those charts next. And so when we're trying to find ways to describe how we're feeling, we may kind of just get stuck. It can feel like our feelings are so overwhelming, we may not necessarily have a word to put it into context. So using a chart like this can be really helpful. So we may feel like we're lacking support, and that's part of what is leading us to feel overwhelmed and lonely. Or we may feel like we're just really kind of fatigued and lethargic, and that's making us feel discouraged and sad. And so these charts are a really great assessment tool. They're a really great descriptive tool for us to help pinpoint a little bit more exactly as to how we're feeling. And if you're working with myself as a yoga therapist, these can be really great because these different areas will help to indicate how we may move forward with a yoga practice for helping to address those feelings, whether you may be in the white zone, the red zone, the blue zone, or the gold zone. And so there's more information on this in my teacher's book, The Gold Zone. That's by Amy Wheeler from Optimal State. I will also include a link to that in this presentation. So please be sure to check that out for more information directly from Amy. And so we have this mental emotional state assessment that will help us to put into words how we're feeling, but then we also want to think about physically what we are experiencing. So let's go ahead and look at the next chart that has that information on it. And so this can help us to put into terms what we might have occurring on a physical level. So for example, if you're feeling just really frazzled, like you just can't put a thought together, you can't get anything sort of out of your head correctly, out of your mouth correctly, this can give you an idea of how to put that into terms that you can describe to someone else. You feel like you may have frazzled nerves. And so all around here, we've got all sorts of different things that we may feel are descriptive of how we're feeling. Like if we are feeling really angry, we may feel like we're burning kind of from the inside out. That may even come with some digestive issues where our tummy literally feels like it's on fire with that emotion of being so angry. And so remember, this is a both and situation where what we're feeling and how we would describe what we're feeling physically may also coincide to what we're feeling and experiencing on an emotional level. And so this does take some practice. Be kind if it doesn't feel supernatural right away. This is one of those things that we want to lean into in terms of developing an awareness of. And so in the next slide, I have an example of what we might kind of use visually or use as imagery when we're trying to describe it to someone else or if we're journaling about it. All right, so for example, if we're feeling frozen or stuck or kind of paralyzed, one of the things that always comes to mind for me when I feel really, really bad, I tend to feel like Jasmine when Jafar puts her in that hourglass and traps her in it. Like time is running out, I'm covered in sand, and I can't go anywhere. And so this is a visualization that I have worked with my personal yoga therapist, my yoga mentor, because this is one that I come back to a lot when I feel so overwhelmed and I feel so stuck in place, not able to make a decision or move forward. this is the visualization that often comes to mind of being trapped in that hourglass. One I also like for anyone who may be a Star Wars nerd is Han Solo when he gets trapped by Jabba the Hutt in the carbonite. And so he's literally not going anywhere. There is nothing going on there. He is totally caught. He is just stuck in that moment. And so these are examples, of course, from movies, from a kids movie, of course, and from a sci-fi movie. And so you may have something that like immediately comes to mind. There may be something that you feel really drawn to as an image that may help to describe how you're feeling. And of course, our feelings are going to change. So there may be different things that we feel at different times that help us to explore that. But having a way potentially to describe this to someone else, like a therapist or a journal or a good close friend or family member, it can make it feel a little bit less permanent. It can make it feel a little bit more escapable, because we do know in both of these scenarios, these people were able to exit the trouble they were in. And so this is some information about the bad place. And of course, we're pretty familiar with this. It's a place that we unfortunately have to go to each cycle, it seems like. But with these tools, hopefully we can make it a little bit less daunting as we work on processing these feelings a little bit better. So now let's go ahead and venture to the good place. And so the good place is a place that we want to visit often. This, of course, is a place that we can come to whether we are in luteal, follicular, in our menstrual phase, wherever we are. Hopefully we can come to the good place very frequently. And so, unsurprisingly, these are going to be the same exact questions. This is the same exact exercise that we would do for the bad place, but we're going to do it from this idea of good, to describe when we are feeling really happy, when we're feeling really whole, content, relaxed, calm, soothed, whatever it may be. And so, again, these are things that we should practice journaling about and also maybe discussing with others, because we don't want to have a negativity bias. We don't always want to pay more attention and give more credence to the bad stuff. The good stuff is just as important, just as valuable, and just as real. And it can also feel like it's less noteworthy because we think it should be the norm, but we're going to fluctuate. That's sadly how life works, or amazingly how life works, depending on how you want to interpret it. And so just like we did before, we're going to take a look at the charts. These are going to be the same charts, and we'll be looking at them from a different perspective now, because we'll be looking at them from a good place. And so more often than not, when we're in the good place, we are not going to be in any of this outer circle area. We should hopefully feel more in this gold zone, which is where we want to be ideally when we're feeling good. And so feeling things like confident or energetic or stable, these are all wonderful ways to help us feel loving and content, to hopefully feel happy and relaxed. And so again, this will be included as a PDF in the Patreon post. So make sure that you check this out, because we want to pay particular attention to this gold zone when we're talking about the good place and the words written on the inner circle here. And so we are not just assessing on the mental emotional level, but we of course also have to pay attention to the physical level. And so again, there's going to be some overlap. We may feel stable on an emotional and mental level, and also stable in our body. And so we may feel like we're having really good digestion, we're having regular bowel movements, we don't have any headaches, we don't feel super dry, we feel like we're the right temperature. And so hopefully feeling pain-free and embodied and strong would be some of the ways that we would describe being in the good place. And now it's also important to know that when we feel good mentally and emotionally, it doesn't necessarily always mean that we'll feel great physically. It is possible to have a cold and still feel good mentally and emotionally. And so we want to pay attention to this, because of course it's also important. Ideally, we feel both at the same time, but always and forever, it is a both and situation. And so again, I want to show you some imagery, some examples of what the good place may feel like. And again, this is from my personal experience because this is part of my yoga practice, my therapeutic yoga practice that I do with my mentor as well. All right. And so for me, my good place is in the mountains and surrounded by trees. I love the views of the mountains. I love to be in the forest. I love to be surrounded by trees. I love the way the wind moves through the leaves, whether it's fall or spring or summer. And so this is my happy place. This is where I feel really content. And so when I may be struggling during luteal, my mentor has recommended that I try to find a way to get to my happy place, whether that is actually physically taking myself outside and getting into the mountains, or sitting and breathing and visualizing myself walking on a path down the mountainside or up the mountainside. And so you likely will have a place that comes to mind almost immediately. It could be at the beach, it could be your childhood home, it could be a park that's near you. It may be something like Disney World. Whatever it may be, think of what your happy place would be, what your good place would look like, how it would feel. And collect images. Find via Google searches places that represent what your good place might be, and keep a folder on your phone or on your desktop that shows you when you may need a reminder of what the good place can be. Because it's not necessary that we are there physically, but if we can put ourselves there mentally, we can do ourselves a huge favor. And so moving on to where we are now, it's really important to remember that our cycle fluctuates and so will our feelings. And so feeling really great sadly doesn't last. Feeling really bad, luckily, does not last. So it's really important that as we learn how to process our emotions, that we don't necessarily make long-lasting decisions based on a temporary emotion. And so we need to recognize where we are in our cycle and what may be influencing our frame of mind at that time. It's also important that we don't invalidate our emotions. We are honoring the lessons that they bring up. What they teach us and what they show us can be really important. It can help us to recognize that maybe a situation isn't serving our highest and best. It can help us to see that added stress that we may be experiencing or taking on in our life is not really necessary. So it's not that we want to ignore how we're feeling or invalidate them. We are really trying to honor them to the best of our ability. We want to take into consideration more than just what's happening right now and look at it with a larger lens from a higher perspective. And we can do that much better as we practice naming the experience we are having, visualizing what it may look like to describe it using those very descriptive words, and recognizing how that may be coming up in our body physically. And so those are therapeutic tools that we can use to help process the emotion that we're experiencing in the moment and help us to have a better sense of control over what we're feeling. Because our feelings are not permanent, but they will stick with us, especially if we don't digest them to the best of our ability. And so with these lessons, we want to add this into our routine of self-care. Whether we're in the follicular phase or in luteal, we want to remember that our feelings are valid and we need to look at them from the perspective of temporary. And so I hope that this lesson really helps you to see that you're not your feelings, but your feelings are really important indicators of where you may need a little bit more TLC and how you can do that. And so let me know if you have any questions. I am honored and thrilled to be able to help you on this journey. Again, check out this PDF. I will make sure that you have a copy, save those journal prompts, and write them down. Get that folder of good place images ready and know that you can come back to this practice again and again, as you should. All right. Thank you so much.